Hello, climbers, and welcome to Season 3 of Climbing Mount CMMC. Hello, climbers, and welcome back to another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC, the podcast. My name is Kaleigh Floyd, and this is Guerra, and we are a part of an MSP called Axiom. We are CMMC Level 2 certified, and we are excited today to talk about false starts, okay? And specifically what they are and how to avoid them. They are being talked about a lot in the ecosystem, and I think it's very important to highlight that this is a possibility when preparing for an assessment. Maybe you didn't prepare enough for it, and you want to make sure that this does not happen to you and your team. So first, let's talk about what exactly these are. So if you guys are not familiar with CMMC Level 2 assessments done by C3PAOs, they have two phases to them, okay? And a false start is when you don't even get out of phase one. Phase one is all about documentation. Okay, you have to bring specific documentation into your assessment so they can even assess that and tell, okay, we can fully assess the evidence of this. This is enough for us to really move forward into phase two. So this is very, very important. Many people that I've talked to have had clients that have thought they were ready and they weren't actually as ready as they said they were. Bobby, do you want to speak a little bit more into this and kind of what's happening in the ecosystem right now?
Yeah, so with the false starts, like you said, it's all about the documentation. And
Right.
some people say, well, no, it's documentation and scoping. Well, yeah, but scoping is part of your documentation. Like you scope it and then you put it in your documentation. And so a lot of times what happens is they go to look at it and say, well, okay, you may say that you have your scoping, but the way that you have it written or documented is not appropriate, as well as when it comes down to like the types of decisions that you've made about how you do your scoping. So a lot of times what can happen is people tried to go a certain direction with technology, only to find in their phase one that the way that they thought technology should function is not appropriate for them to utilize in CMMC. But a lot of times what I'm hearing is that people show up for the assessment and their SSP, looks like their first grader's, homework assignment. Like it's not anything of substance or significant. It's not, it doesn't have, completion to it, doesn't have a lot of information, or the policies and procedures are not written in such a way that are relevant to the way they operate. And so those are a lot of times the big reasons why people aren't able to get out of phase one.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I agree. I've talked to a couple different people who are lead assessors and assessors that have done C3PAO assessments. And there are a lot of people that are doing the controls, but not fully documenting them correctly. And it requires both. It requires the implementation of it and the documentation of it. An assessor has to be able to look at the information that you've given them in phase one and kind of go, okay, I think I know what they're trying to do here. I think I understand what's going on. And if they don't, you're not going to make it out of it. And there are consequences to that. And so, Bobby, if you want to talk about a little bit what those consequences could be if you had a false start.
Yeah. It could be that maybe you lose your deposit. Some C3POs take a deposit at the beginning for them to reserve the spot, and contractually they have it written that if you don't get out of phase one, you forfeit it. And you're like, whoa, what's that all about? Well, if you think about it, the C3PO spends a lot of time of scheduling. They get the assessors who charge them money to be in that audit. So they're going to get a bill for this, whether or not they're able to get you out of phase one or not. So there has to be some type of transaction of cost there that they have to compensate them for. So you're on the hook for some amount of money if you don't get out of phase one. And where that falls varies widely between the C3POs. So having those discussions with the C3PO before you start about what would happen if you weren't able to get through phase one, I think would be a very wise thing to do is to try to have that conversation with the C3PO when you're picking them.
Yeah, I do feel like people have a little bit of a fear of having conversations with C3PAOs because of the requirement of like C3PAOs can't do consulting, and if they do, they can't be your C3PAO for the assessment. So it's like, what questions can I ask? But you very much can understand what their approach is to things like that before you fully sign on the dotted line. So I definitely agree. That is super important to know. Let's talk about how you can avoid it, right? What are the steps you can take? Now, again, we're not going to get super detailed into this podcast, but our goal is for you to come out of this with maybe a little bit of a map, high level view of where you can go so that you can avoid this. And this is a little bit of a spoiler alert for later on, but sometimes it's not even fully your fault, maybe, when you false start. It could be somebody else's fault. So first, let's talk about the number one thing is don't be afraid to ask for help. Bobby can attest that you should take the help when you can get it from people that know more than you about CMMC. If you're new to this space, there is a lot of things to it. It's very intricate. If you're not familiar even with CUI and how to handle data and things like that, it's very important to speak with consultants and people who know how to handle that stuff and how to scope properly before you do it all wrong and spend many hours and many amount of you could say, I guess, documentation throwouts, right? Or SSP rewrites.
Hurts your heart when you do it. But I mean, I guess it's kind of like a time-honored tradition when you're doing CMMC. If you haven't had to throw out at least some documentation, you probably are really off, or you're just an absolute genius.
Right. Yeah, talk to us if you haven't.
Yeah.
We'll love to have you on.
I have yet to talk to someone who hasn't thrown out a huge chunk of documentation and rewrites when it's come to CMMC.
Yeah. And, you don't necessarily, I mean, obviously you cannot ask for help from your C3PAO that's going to do your assessment, but there are plenty of people out there that know how to do this stuff that you could pay to look at where you're at and assess where you're at without it having to be your C3PAO. So it's definitely worth the investment of time and money just to help you with your time and your money and to avoid having to pay even more potentially.
I think some people think, well, I have to be all in with this assistance. If I'm going to have someone come and help me, they have to look at everything. And that's not really the case.
Right.
You could have someone come in and look at some critical sections of your SSP and they can look at it and go, this, and this. And having that additional vision, they can look at some of your policies. You could look at one family, for example. So you can limit your cost while still having someone look at it. Like Tom and Kelly over there at Optic, those people are really great. Brian from MSP CyberX, another really good person to have take a look. I mean, so you got two options right there of two people that you could engage to have some help. And then there's various C3POs that will work with you. I know Amira will. Chris Silvers is another person that does some consulting with others. Kaleigh also does stuff. Karen, Stanford's really good. And Corinne does consulting. But what you're seeing is a lot of these C3POs that we're kind of keeping the door open by doing a lot of consulting because now assessments are really taking off. They're feeling the pressure to meet those deadlines for the assessments and their consulting is shrinking. So, so mileage may vary based on who you talk to.
Another thing that I want to mention, since we're talking about that, is there's different types of help in the community. There's the consulting part of it, like what we're talking about. People can come in, they don't have to do everything, they can just, see where you're at, give you a better understanding on where to go. And then there are also the types of help that will implement it, that will do certain things. Some people will do documentation writing, will help you write things. Some people can implement, like for us, we will help our clients before, during, and after the assessment We'll help write the documentation, build the container, and prep all of those things and maintain it afterwards. So there are like different aspects of help depending on what you're looking for. So I think it's important to also decide what can you handle as a company? What are you looking for in that help? And then go based off of that, you know. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, which we already sort of touched on this, but I really want to emphasize it here, which is documentation. Okay, there is specific required documentation for CMMC. We're talking about the system security plan, right? You have to have a system security plan, a customer responsibility matrix. You have to be able to show them who has access to your environment. What are they doing? What types of controls are they handling? Is it you? Is it the MSP? Is it the CSP? Who is it that is doing these things? And some people that I'm talking to that are like, oh yeah, we're ready. We're almost there. We're at control. I think we're at 110. And then I'm like, all right, well, we'll help you with your CRM. They're like, what's a CRM? I'm like, oh no, that's not good, and I feel bad too, because some of these people actually do have well implemented controls. You have to have both the implementation of it and the documentation of it. The assessor has to see both, or you're not going to be able to get out of phase one.
And it's also important to kind of consider, if you're looking at getting outside help, what kind of help are you looking for? Like, if you were to reach out to us, we have this happen all the time, Kaleigh, you know what I'm about to say probably, is that they're like, well, we're almost there. Can't you just push us over the top? And like, no, because of the way that we work as an MSP, like, we've built a system that's designed to support, and it has to be replicable, and it has to be scalable for what we're doing. And so because we have that system, like, everything that we have is really designed to support that system. And if you're like, but that's not my system, I've got this system over here, can't you just kind of get me over the top and support? And it's really difficult for managed service providers to just come into any environment and magically meet them right where they're at.
Yeah,
and
know
if you start
exactly
to think
how
about
to do it.
yeah, when you start to think about it, you're like, that's not very realistic. So if that's really something you're looking for, a managed service provider may not really be your best choice. What you may want to do is find a consultant, but understand that you will own all aspects of your assessment journey if you bring in a consultant and their job is just to kind of get you over the top and turn the keys over. That means you're probably going to be talking to the assessor. That means that you're going to be looking them eye to eye and be able to know the right things to say without screwing up your assessment journey. And that is very stressful and very different and takes more experience. Like we've gone through 2 assessments now ourselves, and we've got many more scheduled for our clients that are coming. And every time we go through an assessment, we always learn something new. And so unless you're doing this for a living and have gone through multiple assessments, it's going to be stressful and a challenge for anyone if they're only going to do it once every 3 years. I don't see how you could.
No, I mean, and many of these people, I'm sure listening, that are trying to do this side probably have another job as well. So this isn't even their main job, We've had a lot of people come to us that have already created some of their SSP, and they're like, could you not just finish writing it? And then we're like, no, we have our own way of doing things. And then they look at ours and they go, okay, let's just do it that way, because it's just, in some ways, you have a business to run, you have things to do. You don't want to have to be handling all of this. You want somebody else to be handling all of it. So, some people, though, they do have an IT team, that's capable of this. There's not a lot of them that I've seen out there, but some of them do have that, and they do just need that consulting help, and that's the kind of help that they need. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And with that help comes help with the documentation, right, of what we were saying. So you have direction in those ways too. You could potentially get templates from those people to help you along your way. I would highly recommend doing that too if you don't know where you're going yet. Another thing is, with consultants, a lot of them can even do mock assessments for you, which is the next point that I wanted to talk about. If you can get a C3PAO that's obviously, available to do these, which some of them might not be as available nowadays, but if you can schedule a mock assessment to even just go through a practice round before you do the full thing. Bobby can definitely talk about his perspective because that's what he did. So
Yeah.
what about the differences between those and maybe how it helped you for the real assessment, Bobby?
Yeah, if there was like one thing that you just listened to anything that I said, this right here, like listen to it. Get a mock assessment done. And here's the beauty of it. You don't have to mock assess your whole environment. You could have them assess one control just so you can kind of have the feeling of going through it. There's lots of organizations out there, people that have experience that would be more than willing to walk through that with you. You just want to make sure, here's the things you want to pay attention to, that they've actually done either DIBCAC assessments, have gone through the audits, and have seen it. Don't just because they're CCAs or CCPs or they've been in the industry or they're RP or PO. No. Like, how many C3PO assessments have you done, have gone through? You want to make sure that whoever is running you through that has done them before and have sat through it and really understand it. And so that's why we actually picked Brian from MSP CyberX, who had done at that point, I think when he did ours, like multiple JSVA assessments.
Yeah.
And so I knew I was getting a very accurate representation of what we could expect. And we just had him actually assess us on a section of our SSP process. So we just picked some specific controls and said, go through these. It'll probably take a few hours, and he charged us for the time to go through. I mean, he wasn't able to do the due diligence of reading it in advance, which you're supposed to do for your audit, but it really helped level us up to understand what we needed to be ready for. Having that, we've talked about it many times on this podcast, being properly prepared for the cadence of the assessment.
Yeah, we call it the assessment dance. Or maybe we called it the assessment tango. I don't know.
Tango, I think.
So we did. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine it. An assessment is not cheap. You don't want to phone that in. Like, if you had a chance to practice before, why wouldn't you?
Right.
Why wouldn't you? It just makes sense because I love how you say this too. The human factor makes its way. It always knows how to weave into your documentation or your implementation in some way. And assessors love to catch it. It could be the stupidest little things, but like doing a mock assessment like that can really help prepare you for that human factor and maybe avoid some mishaps and some mistakes along the way.
And I think having that, like that point one of getting a consultant, like that's like where I think a consultant is super helpful is in the scoping conversation.
Right.
Is you can sit down and say, here's my drawing and here's what I'm thinking and I'm gonna use these tools and I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna try this. Consultants are really good at talking like cerebrally and theory and that kind of stuff, and they can help validate your scope. And that might be a half a day conversation with a very valid C3PO that you could use that could go through that, or somebody that's certified. They can help you go through that, and then you layer that. So now your scope, because keep in mind, if your scope's messed up, you ain't getting through phase one, right? You're not gonna get that. Your mock assessment will help you also be prepared to have that conversation the right way in phase one so you can get through that. But it also carries really well into your phase two of helping make sure that you're on the 5-yard line, that you get that ball in the end zone and score.
Totally.
So it's really, really important. So I think both of those working together is money well spent.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, the last thing I wanted to mention, which I kind of teased this at the beginning, is maybe potentially the false start isn't necessarily even fully your fault. And what I mean by that is some people don't realize that there are other people roped into your scope, which I think goes with what Bobby was saying about ask for help with that scope, because you might be surprised with some things that are in scope. And what I mean by that is an ESP, an external service provider, that is servicing you in certain ways and that has access to your environment is going to get pulled into your assessment. Is that ESP or that MSP, like somebody like us, are they prepared for that? Do they know what's going on? I'm shocked. I've heard assessors even say that like the MSP didn't even know what was going on. Like they had just told them like, yeah, you just had to talk about some of the things that you're doing, in our environment. Like, no, that's not all they have to do. When you look at the cap, it tells you if you have an external service provider that is roped into your scope, they are required to bring documentation too. I I wish I could stand on a large building and scream that out into the universe because so many people don't know this. That
Right.
is just bringing along their MSP without knowing the requirements that come with that. Does the MSP have an SSP, a system security plan themselves? Do they have a customer responsibility matrix that speaks to what they're doing? And does the agreement between the two of you speak directly to 32 CFR and NIST 800-171 controls? Like, that is so important, and you could literally not get past phase one because of those things.
Have you heard? I've not heard any MSPs really talk about that.
No. Or they talk about one and don't know the rest of them. Many
Mhm.
people don't. Many MSPs don't think about the agreement. That's a
Right.
thing that goes very unnoticed for sure. Yeah, it's and this is really hard for an MSP to do. Bobby has mentioned this before plenty of times. For an MSP, it's two mountains. It's like getting yourself ready and then preparing yourself to service multiple clients in the same capacity, which is very difficult. So, not just your average Joe Schmo, MSP can do this, but many are trying, and it's super scary. We call that marriage counseling approach to CMMC,
Mhm.
where the MSP is learning and trying to figure out CMMC by doing it side by side with their client. And that is just not good. Very dangerous because this is where a false start could happen. And it
Right.
could be the MSP's fault because they're not fully prepared. And I think, don't want to toot our own horn here, but that's why I think Bobby was like, well, let's do it ourselves first. We're going to get CMMC level 2 certified so that we know what to do when we take our clients through it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Bobby, is there any things that you feel like you learned from you going through it first that you're like, yeah, I think I do it differently, now for our clients, or now I know this, or those types of things? What was your perspective on that?
Yeah, this is just opinion. This is not going to be fact. But for me, it made sense that I couldn't really validate the approach that I'm going to use to support my clients unless I had gone through the assessment myself and validated our approach
Mm-hmm.
and how we were going to do things and the tools that we were going to use. And we wanted to build a system that we would support our clients from. And that's what we had assessed so that we can live in, because we said to ourselves, well, we need to be able to live in this system as an MSP and support our clients. Like we can't just build a little teeny, junk drawer where this is where our CMMC lives and that's what we
Yeah.
get assessed. Like we've got to move out of that and really be able to support it. So we built a system that we could support our clients out of. And from there, we use that to now leverage how we were going to validate and support and document and handle that process for our clients. And that made the most sense for us. But I know there's a lot of people who have tackled it from different perspectives as MSPs.
Mm-hmm.
And having an MSP that has gotten level 2 certified definitely raises your confidence level. But as I just kind of described, there's lots of different ways to kind of come at this. So I think picking that organization's brain about understanding when you're picking them, how they came about it and what they did, I think is really important, because if the MSP, all they wanted to do is try to get the certificate on the wall, right, and point to that and say, see, we know what we're doing, that doesn't necessarily mean that's true. What that means is now they are at the starting gate, right? They're at the starting blocks to take off and
Yeah.
start working with that client, and they have an understanding of how assessments work, and they've got a system that has been assessed.
That's so
But you
true.
now need to start thinking about, okay, well, how are they using that system to support me? How
Yeah.
are they using, what methodologies do they have to get me there? Are they just saying, trust me, I'll get you there. See, I got my level 2 because I did it for me. And let me tell you, I got my level 2 and I was like, yeah, that's great. But the next day I'm like, now we've got to figure, all of these things out to make sure that we're doing it the right way for our clients. And those aren't, just because you got level 2 doesn't mean that magically it's easy for you to move your clients through that.
No.
That's just not the case.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, I was just talking about this too, with our team of like, we have learned that not all CMMC level 2 MSPs are created equal. Not all of them are approaching it in the same way. So,
Right.
and that's okay. Maybe you might need a certain type of it. You know what I mean? You might need a different approach. And so it is so true that even though that MSP is CMMC level 2 certified, it's like, okay, but is their approach the one that I'm looking for? Is that what I need?
Perfect example is you go through MSP has got their level 2. It's great. But did you ask them, are they going to be sitting in the chair right to your right to answer the questions when it comes time for the audit?
Yeah.
And because you haven't thought about asking that question, you may have a false start because the MSP, all they're going to do is get you ready and turn your documentation over and provide their level 2 evidence that they have. And in their opinion, they don't need to talk. It's your job to do that.
Right.
Are you prepared to have that conversation?
Right. If you are, great. But if not, that's not good.
Right. So you need to think about like, are they going to be there? Because that is that organization. It is, if you think about it, I am not, if I go to court, I want my attorney talking more than me because that's what they do for a living.
Yeah.
Right. I want to talk the least amount because there's a greater chance I'm going to screw up and say something I shouldn't.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, and I mean, I'm glad that you even talked about that. The specifics, are they going to sit with you in that assessment? Because many don't. And that doesn't mean that they're a bad MSP. It's just that's how their approach is. And you want to make sure you're fully understanding who you're walking with before you get on the path. We've had many people come to us that have had like a different MSP or whatnot, and that's okay, but they couldn't get them to where they needed because they realized that they needed more or needed a different approach. So just make sure you understand that. The other thing is too, we would be bad if we didn't mention another side of it, which is CSPs, cloud service providers, having, a FedRAMP authorized tool, knowing what that means, knowing what's in your environment, because that could really screw an assessment up for you.
Yep.
Those tools could literally make a control not met. And you do not want that. You want to understand exactly what's in your environment. You want to understand what it's pulling, what data is it pulling, can it grab the CUI, all those things. That's also what can be very helpful. What can be very helpful with talking to a consultant is because those people really do understand that kind of stuff and can ask those questions. Too, especially if you're working with, like I said before, an ESP or a managed service provider that is even bringing in more tools to your environment. If you're not prepared for it, you could have even more tools than you think you do in your environment, which is very concerning too. And then I want to give a little shout out to Kaleigh, who was recently on, that talked about the dev team, or development teams that are also in your environment that might have like full admin privileges that are opening all of these things that you haven't even talked to, that could really screw up your scope if you're not careful with. So even talking not necessarily to external service providers or CSPs, cloud service providers, but also in your environment. Are you talking to all of your team so you know what they're doing and how they're doing it, so they also don't get you messed up before you even get into the phase 2, right?
So true.
So
you don't want that being discovered.
No, you don't. I can't believe you have nothing else to add to that. Did I say it well enough?
No, that was great.
Wow,
Yeah.
I'm shocked.
Yeah.
Somebody write that down for me. But anything else you want to add, Bobby, that could help people to avoid a false start that you could think of?
No, I think that really covered it. I think the important thing here is just listen to the advice that we're providing you. It is very sage advice. It's going to cost you some money. It won't be anywhere the cost of an assessment. And if you think about it, if you have to reschedule, are they going to be able to get you right back in right away?
Yeah.
What if you've got contracts and bids that are like dependent? Like you have to be one and done with this. Or if you get back at the end of the line, you may not be able to get reassessed if you can't get past phase one for months. And maybe that's a deal breaker on some of these critical contracts that you're well down the path of wanting to be able to start to do the bidding process on. That could be hugely detrimental to the health and well-being of your business. Well, Climbers, looks like Kaleigh's lost her internet, so she's out and down, so she won't be able to close us out like she normally does. But I just think that this episode really does such a great job of bringing some very practical applications to what we're doing. So definitely we're going to add some links and pointers to some other organizations that we mentioned in here that can really help you in some of these areas. And we've seen firsthand the type of work they've done. They're very, very good at what they do, and they can kind of help get you right over that last little bit that can really make the difference in your audit. So as always, Climbers, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe. And if you're on a media that allows you to be able to, comment or, rate our podcast, that's always very helpful. But as always, thank you for joining us, and keep on climbing. Until next time.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.